So I'm hoping that eventually some of you will actually show up here because I'd like to be able to actually, oh, there's people. I'd like to actually talk to you guys. I'd like to actually be able to talk to you guys a little bit about grad school and not just sit here and recite off some sort of presentation, because if you were to go to the channel, there's already a presentation from the psych fair, which was essentially what I'm going to be using as a basis for this. But we can try to go. You're honestly so ready for this. Okay, Janetzi or Janetzi. I misspelled or mispronounced it at least once. But I'm going to try to use the template that I used for the PowerPoint in that presentation. And then if you have any particular questions and you're here, which some of you are, which I'm very happy about, you can just jump them in, put them in the comment section, and we'll be good to go. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about with you guys in terms of graduate school is to take a step back for a second and not really sit here and focus so much on what does a graduate school want from me, where you're sitting here trying to think about all of these different steps of the application process and how am I going to do on my GRE or my GMAT or my MCAT or whatever it is that you're doing to try and get into grad school. Because at this point, you should have already done the assignment to look some of these things up. So instead of sitting here and basing everything that you're thinking about with grad school on what they want from you, you need to start this process off with thinking about what you want from the school. So there's this misconception, especially in psychology, that you need to have a PhD in order to be successful in the field. And if you listen to the video where we started talking about different careers in psychology, that's really not the case, at least not for the majority of areas in psych. You can be extremely successful without having a PhD. So I have a little checklist of things that you should ask yourself before you even think about whether or not you're going to make that commitment towards the PhD. First, well, PhD or PsyD or MD or JD or EdD or anything that ends in D. Right? Doctorate at the end of it. So first off, does your career require it? So biggest number one misconception in psychology: to be a therapist, I have to go have a PhD in clinical psychology. Absolutely not true. Said it a million times, but if this is the first time you're watching a video, I'll say it again. It is absolutely not true. You can be a counselor and a very successful counselor with a master's degree, and you can go afterwards to get something called a licensed mental health counseling certification, where there's not really much different between you and a PhD carrying therapist in terms of what you're going to do in the room with patients. Now, a PhD in clinical psych lead you towards research and, different kinds of settings with different kinds of populations maybe, but not actual therapy. So 2, do you want to teach in academics at the university level? So if you do want to at some point teach in academics, the PhD is probably the path you want to go down. If you don't, that's not one of your ambitions, then keep moving down the list, because we haven't sold you on a PhD yet. So do you want to work in clinical settings such as a hospital? There are a lot of jobs with master's focuses where you can work in a hospital. So don't think that it's required, but to be something like a neonatal psychologist or a clinical psychologist in a hospital or a psychiatrist or any of those sorts of things that work with really critical populations, you might want to be checking out the PhD. Now, do you not want to work in that setting? All right, keep moving down the list. We haven't sold you on a PhD yet. So do you want to work with specific high-risk populations? Meaning pretty much what I just said. Like, do you want to work with infants who are at high needs or children who are really high needs? Do you want to work in these clinical medical types of scenarios? Nope, keep moving down. Haven't sold you yet. Do you want to work in a high-level administrative position? So do you want to be a CEO of something someday? Do you want to, anything that's the very top of an organization, a higher degree will help you. But if you're not aspiring to go be the head of the department of whatever, in whatever job you're going to have, still haven't sold you yet on the PhD. Now, maybe you want to go approach psychology from a consulting perspective, which you can do through IO and you can do through other fields too, like legal psychology. They consult a lot with cases and attorneys and trials and different legal type stuff like that. So do you want to be a consultant, and do you want to climb the corporate ladder of being a consultant more quickly? So yeah, you might want to climb it more quickly, but you can balance that out. So if you go into a consulting firm like Accenture, for example, and you look at your bachelor's, master's, doctoral level entrance, the difference is that doctoral degree holders come in with more tenure. They don't have to work there. They already get a certain amount of benefit and tenure in the company by having a higher degree. So somebody can get into that same job with a master's degree and still work their way up, which is probably what you should do. And then the last thing on my list is, do you want one just to have it? That's frankly what a lot of people who go into this and stick through this do. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that partially that was me, where I knew from a young age I just wanted to have a PhD. And I was very narrow-minded in thinking about what kind of end goal there was for me. And I knew that I was not going to be content until I went through a PhD program. So that's something that you have to decide for yourself. I don't even know how many people are here. Oh, there's 10 people here. I'm so excited. Got double digits. So if none of those have piqued your interest yet, then a master's program is probably something that's going to suffice for whatever it is that you want to do. You want to do behavior analysis? You don't even need a master's degree. Why are you looking into that? You can start off with your BCABA and run off into the sunset and never go through the kinds of debt and hardship that come with graduate school. But for most of you, the things that you want to do are going to be accomplished through getting that master's degree. And the good news is that it's much, much easier to get a master's degree than to get a PhD, to get into a master's program than to get into a PhD program. And most universities offer more master's programs than they do PhD programs, just because the resources that are needed for a PhD are much larger than for a master's program. A bachelor's degree is what you would do, yes, to get a BCABA, but it's a program in addition to a bachelor's degree. So there's like a step ladder of the process where you get the RBT, like you mentioned, you get your bachelor's degree, and then you have to go through, I don't know what the website is, but you go through the state of Florida and they have all of these little certifications and stuff that you need to do on your way up the ladder. And the BCABA, I don't think, is more than a year in addition to your bachelor's degree. But if you have an RBT and a bachelor's degree, you can start doing registered behavioral technician stuff underneath the supervision of a BCABA and use those sorts of things towards the hours that you need to get the BCABA. So that's part of what's different about behavior analysis, is that they want you in there doing something with that degree or with that population prior to sending you off into the world with a degree. They want to make sure you have that practical experience. Whether or not FIU certifies in that, I don't know. I know that when I started the PhD program, they were fighting for master and PhD level programs in behavior analysis. Something to consider when you're looking at graduate schools is that, you know how you go and you do research in the FIU library and you go in and you put like the sky is blue and you get 0 results and you get really discouraged, and then you stumble upon something and you realize that for some reason it's phrased like Yoda, like blue the sky is. That's the way you needed to look it up. A lot of programs have different names for things. Like most people don't know that FIU has an IO program again because it's called a Masters of Organizational Science now. So when you go into those programs, they should list to you the required coursework. Start looking through that coursework and seeing what that degree is actually all about. Because programs say you want to take like some sort of social course, like social track in your master's or PhD. Not a lot of places say that, but it would fall underneath the developmental program for a lot of them. And as long as there's faculty that do research in that area, you can still get in and do research or whatever in that area yourself. What is the difference between general and clinical psychology? When you see clinical psychology, you're talking specifically about clinical populations. So I've been accused in my own studies in IO of being too clinical in the scope of the things that I want to measure, because I've always wanted to look at psychiatric sorts of disorders, like psychological problems in the workplace. And that is something that you have to have a clinical degree in, because when you're talking about diagnosis of disorders and treatment of patients and different conditions like autism or ADHD and things like that, that's where you're in a clinical setting. In terms of general psychology, you're not going to find upper level degrees like master's and up in general psychology, because it's essentially like the same exact thing you just took in your bachelor's degree. It would be a little bit of everything. So it's not something that you want to do at a master's level, because that's where you're supposed to specialize. I can go over the interview thing, but I will do it after I get through all the little points here. I don't want to derail this too much. So in terms of actually applying, you guys should have gone through the assignment already with the different steps of things that you need to apply. So there are components of the application that I can confirm to you are extremely important in the process of deciding between you and whoever else your competitors are who apply to that program. So being involved in your undergraduate career is really important. Involvement can take on a lot of different forms. It could be involvement because you're involved in the community. It could be involvement because you're in a research lab. It could be in clubs or organizations or places where you've taken leadership roles on campus. Involvement doesn't have to be any one particular thing. So if you haven't been involved in clubs, that's fine. If you haven't been involved in a research lab, that's fine. There's different ways that you can pull that experience out of the 4 years that you did at FIU. So there's undergraduate involvement and there's research involvement. And what a lot of students at FIU in particular, I don't know about anywhere else, but a lot of the students I see underestimate how much research you've actually done as an undergrad at FIU. So if you go look at the sequence of FIU's courses, I mean, now you have the careers course that should start it off, but you've got those 2 method sequences, and then you've got a seminar, and you've got a lot of classes where you're at least doing literature reviews and writing papers on different subject areas. You're asked to create some sort of unique topic to look at, and those things all count towards this graduate process. And when I have my senior seminar and we sit down and we do resume stuff, I make sure that that's included in everybody's resumes, because it definitely counts. So volunteer experience, statement of purpose. This is a pretty important thing. You're going to want to write your statement of purpose out. You're going to want to run it through a billion different people to get feedback from different perspectives. You want to make sure it's grammatically correct. And you can really pick one of 2 options of how you go about writing a statement of purpose. You can take a very direct professional route where you are highlighting, most importantly, all of the different experiences you've had. So if you're somebody that's done tons and tons and tons of research, you might want to make it a research-focused statement of purpose. Or you can do a more narrative approach where if you have a particular life story, like when you were a child, you were hit by a bus and the bus driver had ADHD, and you and the bus driver somehow made this magical relationship, and it made you want to pursue a degree in psychology because you were determined to make sure that people never hit somebody else in a bus again, because there's this intervention you could do. I know this is drastic, right? But a lot of the statement of purposes sound like that. There's some story there of what makes you unique as a candidate. So to me, the best sort of statement of purpose is going to mesh those two things together. It's going to be practical, but at the same time, it's going to have some narrative of the personal side of why you're doing it. A CV or a resume, which if you want to know about that, you can contact me. That's kind of what I do with my life. Recommendation letters are extremely important. And do not go into a graduate program with a recommendation letter that is not from somebody in a university setting, unless the program specifically asks for it. So I know if you're going into physical therapy or occupational therapy, they have separate types of recommendation letters for physical therapists that you might have shadowed and whatnot. But if you're applying to a PhD program or even to like a master's in counseling, don't use people from work. You want to have somebody who can answer questions about you in an academic setting, because that's what the graduate program cares about. So read the letters before you're submitting them to. I made the mistake the first time I applied to grad schools, and I just sent my letters off, and I ended up applying to one less school than I thought I was. So I had a whole set of rec letters. They used to be on paper. Now they're not on paper anymore. And I read through them, and I was like, no wonder. That's why I did not get in. These letters were terrible. So a good person who's going to write you those letters is going to sit down with you, show you what the letter is, talk to you about why they're saying the things that they are, and not just submit some standardized thing. Test scores, GRE is a little different now than it was back in my day. A 160 could be the 70th percentile or the 80th percentile or the XYZ percentile, depending on what your specific little scores were on the individual things. So the benefit to you in the change is that there's no hard cutoff for most programs. There's kind of like a little area, a gray area, where as long as you get in there, they'll tend to accept you, even if it's not the best of GRE scores. Is the GRE hard? Of course the GRE is hard. The GRE is the worst test you're ever going to take in your life. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I took the GMAT, which is for business. Much, much easier, much more straightforward. I'm sure the MCAT and the dental exam are harder, but the GREs, it's not fun. I took it 3 times. And how it works is it's on a system where when you get in, the first so many questions that you have are extremely important in deciding what your end score is going to be. So the more you answer right, the more it puts you in a higher categorization where, say you get like the first 5 right, now suddenly you can get between like 100 and 120 on it or whatever. If you miss the first 5, now you're put down into a category where even if you get the whole rest of the test right, you can only score an 80. Now these are random numbers, but this is the general idea. So if you find your questions getting easier and easier as you take the GRE, that probably means that you're not doing very well on that portion. And when you get to the end of the test, you have a choice. It tells you, do you want to keep the scores or do you want to dismiss them? So if you choose to keep them, they go into that record and they never disappear. If you take the test again, they'll still see the original scores on your GRE. It'll itemize them out. If you choose no, you don't want to accept it, the scores go off into wherever. Nobody ever knows what they are. It doesn't show you what you got. So the only way to know what you got on the GRE is to submit it. But if you feel like you didn't do well, my advice is to not submit it, to go back to study a little bit more, and then to take it again, even though it's a little bit more money, because a bad score can completely sabotage your application process. How many questions does it typically have for psychology? 0, unless you take the psychology subtest, which is very, very rarely required for anything. You're not going to see any psychology questions. So you can take subtests in a variety of different subject areas, and there is one for psychology. But even if you see a program that says, average psych score of whatever on the GRE, you might want to check whether or not that's actually a requirement. Because no program I've ever applied to or seen has actually had a solid requirement for that. Writing samples, keep your papers from your classes, because even if a program doesn't require samples, which some do, it still looks good if you can submit like your methods paper and whatnot to show that you actually have a grasp on what it's going to be like to write things at a graduate level. And then, does GPA matter a lot? So my last thing on my list is grades. I used to think that having a 4.0 was going to make me the best candidate ever for every program. And they were going to eat my 4.0 up and they were all going to want me. And that was absolutely not the case. So your GPA is important, but what's more important is kind of the average amongst all the things that I've talked about for this application process than having a GPA. You can have a 4.0, have no involvement, have done no research, and maybe even still have average GRE scores and not get into a program, because they want people who are well-rounded. They want people who know how to balance education with outside life. So if you have a 4.0 and all of the other things, that's great. You are one of the top, 0.005% of all applicants. But once you're above 3.0, you're a contender for grad programs. Some even go as low as 2.5. Don't do that though. So 3.0 makes you a contender. Once you're at 3.5, you're looking really good and you're going to make the stats for that school look better. If you're above like a 3.7 or 3.8, don't even worry about it. Your GPA is not going to be a factor anymore. It's kind of like an average, so you submit the application and it looks at your GPA and then it kind of yes knows you. Like, did it meet the minimum? Yes, no. Okay, now we're going to kick your application either to the trash or to whoever is on the committee reviewing it. So don't stress if you have a GPA below what you think it should be, because other things can compensate for it. I am rambling a lot, but hopefully it is somewhat useful. So in terms of, whoa, I forgot that my PowerPoint on here is all kinds of crazy. So in terms of undergraduate involvement, kind of already reiterated this. I already know my own PowerPoint so well that I know what I'm supposed to say. But somebody asked about internships, and internships would fall under that category of undergraduate involvement. It's not incredibly easy to get internships in the area of psychology, because psychology, it's not like majoring in finance where everybody takes the same series of courses and knows the same types of things in finance, and you can literally pluck them out of the department, put them into a business, and they should know how to handle the finance section of that business. People in psychology focus on a very wide array of things. So finding an internship, not the easiest of things to do. If you're looking into IO psychology, you can go do anything business related and that helps. But if you're doing anything else, the best type of internship that you can do is really in the different labs that are on campus. And they actually sent out something this past week for a paid research internship. I can forward it to you guys. I'm not sure if they're still taking applications, but it was $16 an hour, 20 hours a week to work in a particular lab on campus. First one I've ever seen that's actually paid, and $16 is way more than any other on-campus job will pay you. I calculated it out for the whole year. If you were to work 52 weeks, it was like something like $17,000 to get experience for doing research. So there's plenty of opportunities on campus in the Center for Children and Families and any of the stuff that's related to the med school in particular. They're always looking for people, and they're not temporary things. They want you to go in, they want you to give them at least a year. Sometimes they'll give you 2 years, and you'll work on a wide variety of different stuff, both applied and more research oriented. So other than that, I mean, if you were going into behavior analysis, you can, shadow or whatever somebody who's doing that. If you're going into more of a medical direction or any of the types of speech, OT, PT sort of stuff, you want to go into doctor's offices or hospitals, and they have shadowing programs that are usually pretty standardized. I see a lot of students who work at the Nicholas Children's Hospital, at Baptist, at UM, at doctors, all those different places. Does senior seminar teach all of this information? It depends on who you take senior seminar with. Every single seminar is going to focus on something different. I mean, they all have different subject areas that they're oriented towards to begin with. I teach this kind of stuff in seminar, but I can't speak on behalf of really anybody else. My goal with the careers class is to get this stuff into your system before you ever even see senior seminar, so that you're ready for more advanced sorts of stuff by the time you get there. That's my goal, but we're still working on it. Research experience. So I talked about being in a lab or being a lab assistant. So you can do it through going, and you can Google the FIU psychology lab website, lists every single lab out. We talked about that already. You can be a research assistant to a particular professor. I'm behind, but I am starting the sort of process of building a lab for my own dissertation, which it's not going to be a lab like you think of on campus with like beakers and white jackets or anything. But we're going to work together on project, get me graduated so I can get a real job and not be an adjunct faculty for the rest of my life. So you can work with a particular person. Grad students love having help because we are extremely overwhelmed with life. So you can find one, you can probably convince them to let you into the project. So you can do something called like a senior thesis or honors project, which is where you find a professor who has these open credits, which you can find them through just your general PantherSoft thing when you're going to register for classes. You go in and there's something that you'll see that says independent research or senior thesis or honors project or honors thesis. I don't even know what it's called anymore, but it's PSY and it's a 4,000 level class. And you'll see that they all require permission codes. So you can go and register for those credits once you get a professor to kind of sign on to work with you on that kind of project. And it gives you a real boost in terms of research on your resume. If you haven't taken research methods yet, and you're going to take it, get the most out of it that you can. Don't blow off research methods, because it's going to be probably your least favorite class that you take as a psychology student, but it's going to be the most important. Everything that you do in research methods, you're going to use towards something in the future. Don't underestimate the importance of those two classes. And then I already talked about how you're going to do research in your classes in general. Save your papers. Utilize that when people are asking you, do you have any research experience? Yes, well, I did a literature review on personality and primates and why female primates are nicer than male primates, whatever it is that you did. Can you participate in research labs on campus if you're going to graduate at the end of the term? So from what I understand, involvement in the lab is not contingent upon you being enrolled as a student. They tend to advertise it to students because they know that the students are going to be able to be there for that period of time. So if you've already graduated and you go get a job, they're going to look at you as more of a flight risk if they're looking for somebody for a full year and they're not offering you any money for it. But other than that, I do not believe that there's anything that holds you back if you've already graduated, or say they want you for a year and you're graduating in the middle of that at some point, as long as you kind of reassure them that you're going to be there. Because there's plenty of people that get to the end of their bachelor's degree, are forced to graduate by FIU now, right? You get to a certain amount of credits and off you go. And then they realize that they still have stuff that they need to do in order to be prepared for grad school. So there's people that take a year off between that application, or between graduation and that application, and go and do research in labs like this. So absolutely, yes, go apply to them. Just talk to them about what you're expecting out of the future, both with them and for yourself. Research experience should not be your worry. Even if you're a really antisocial person that doesn't want to get involved in a lab or doesn't know how to approach a professor or whatever it is, like I have something that I've written myself for my students in seminar to add to their resume that's just a breakdown of the methods course and all of the things that you do. So if you look at a research lab and what do? They have some sort of hypotheses geared towards whatever the lab is looking at, and they create a literature review, they design an experiment, they do the experiment, they collect the data, they clean the data, they run the data, they analyze it, and they come up with some sort of conclusion and apply it to the real world. That's what goes on in a lab. Now, what part of that process in the lab are you going to be involved in? Sometimes you get into a lab and your job is to be part of that experimental procedure where you're interviewing participants or you're slicing up monkey brains in the neuroscience lab and you're a glorified deli worker for hours out of the week. So that's all you're doing. It's like a little deli machine. They just slice the brains and they look at the individual little scans, the little slices, and they do stuff on it. So what have you done in methods? You've come up with a hypothesis. Whether or not you got to actually do the research experiment or they had you make it up, you did a literature review, you had some sort of experience with data, you put it into SPSS, you ran it in some way, you wrote up an analysis and discussion section, and that is essentially the components of what research is. So you've done it. You've done it. You just have to figure out how to utilize the things that you've done and communicate those things to a grad school if that's what you want to do, or a job that might want it. Anything else on research? I'm looking. Have I lost people? I lost one, but that's okay because there's still 9 of you. Oh no, there's 11 of you here. I'm lying. I'm gaining. So I talked about a little bit about volunteer experience. If you're planning on going into med school or any of the therapeutic sorts of fields, and when I say therapeutic, I don't mean like counseling. I mean the physical, OT, that sort of stuff. They want you to have a certain amount of volunteer hours in order to get into the program. Now, there's a thing. If you Google it, I think it's called the FIU Service Medallion, where you can go in and register your volunteer hours with FIU. I think it's through the OrgSync website somewhere, which is through Campus Life. But if you do a certain amount of hours, they give you this fancy little medallion, and you get to wear it at graduation and look really, really fancy. And you can kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Not the best volunteer activity metaphor for you, but you can both get that medallion and actually get the experience towards those programs. Do I know of any information on spiritual healing certifications? I would have no idea. That sounds like something that would be done through either a private institution or something that had a program in theology. But that's not a very typical psychology program. I do know that some people who go into counseling go into more of a holistic counseling field, but there are very specific, like I said, there's very specific private universities that offer programs like that. A public university is probably not going to have that. You're going to have to look into like some little tiny university in New England somewhere that's like the size of my living room, but offers that really specific thing. You're going to be a Google warrior to find that out. I know. Sounds funny, but so I talked to you about statement of purpose, a resume. I wanted to make you guys do a resume in this class, but I thought it would be a little too much. That's what we do, or you will do in senior seminar. You will make a resume. If you take seminar with me, it's going to be the best resume ever. I want to hope that everybody else is going to give you a really good one too, but I know mine's going to be better. I'm just saying, I know it is. Recommendation letters, we already talked about that. Test scores, we talked about that. Writing scores, we talked about that. Grades, we talked about that. All right. Talked a lot. Talked a lot about a lot. So here's a realistic preview of what it's going to look like to apply to school, right? So if you're looking into any sort of doctoral level program, the applications usually open sometime in summer, like open. You can go and see them, start filling them out sometime in summer, and they're due in that fall semester the year before you want to start. So if you wanted to start in a PhD program next year, your applications are probably due within the next week or two. They're almost always due before the beginning of the calendar year that you're going to start in. So if you were going to start December 2019, those things would be due usually in like November, December of 2018, maybe into January 2019. And then public universities will use, or private universities will usually take applications longer because they know you're going to be paying out of pocket to go there. So they have bigger classes in general that they accept. But PhD programs can accept as little as like 2 people per year, maybe up to, I wouldn't even say 10. I don't think I've ever seen a program that's accepted 10 people in one semester. It's usually like 3 to 6 students for a PhD program. An MD program or a law program, they accept more students because their classes are just bigger and it's different than an actual PhD. A PsyD is going to have bigger classes because you're going to be in a private university usually. And like I said, they know they're getting money from you, so they'll take more people than a PhD that's usually got some sort of government funding tied to it somehow. So master's programs can be on what they call a rolling admissions, which is where the application is just open all the time. And you can go in and you can apply and they'll consider you in like little waves. So they might consider you in May for the fall, and then they might do another round in the fall for the spring and whatnot. Or they can be like PhD programs where they have that year before you start sort of cut off. So I think that the programs at FIU in the psych department are, what do we call them? They're like structured programs. You take the full year at a time. So if you go in and you fail a class and they somehow still let you stay, you have to wait a whole nother year to take that class again. So they have those admissions that work more like PhD programs. But the business school, so if you wanted to go and get the HR masters or the marketing masters or an MBA or whatever in the business school, they tend to have the more revolving admissions where they'll start classes every single semester or they'll start them twice a year sort of deal. So you have to look those things up way in advance. Yes, I will be your advisor. That's what I'm doing right now. Like literally carry YouTube around in your pocket and use me as your little academic security blanket whenever you need. It's totally fine. I know these things because I've failed at them enough to where they've stuck in my head. So got to get into your applications early. The actual process of applying is extremely time consuming. Do not underestimate how much time it is going to take to actually do these things, because you have to hunt down all the people that are going to write your rec letters. You have to get copies of your test scores sent from the GRE place or whatever test you took place to every single university you apply to. You have to get usually 2 copies of your transcript sent to all of those places, which means you have to go talk to the registrar's office at FIU. It is not a fun place to go. And you go in and you do that and you get those out. Then you have to get writing samples if they want it. And sometimes they want part of the things done electronically and part actually mailed to them. It's like a full-time job. Usually they ask you for 3 letters of recommendation. That's the standard. Some will ask for 2. Most will not ask for any more than 3. It's usually the trifecta of people that you need. So say you have those 3, you're usually going to want at least one of them to be from the subject area that you're applying to. So when I applied in IO, letters are hard, all right? Letters are hard. When I applied in IO, I had somebody from business. I had somebody from undergrad who was outside of even psychology because I took 7 classes with them and they knew me very well. And I had somebody from a really practical business sort of thing that was done through the University of Florida. So they weren't all in psychology, but they all related something to academics. So you want at least one of them to be in the area that you're going to. So if you're applying to counseling, you're probably going to want somebody that is tied to the counseling program in some way who's going to write that letter for you, and not maybe like 3 people from criminal justice, because that's what you minored in. You got to have somebody in psych there somewhere. How far in advance should you ask for a letter of recommendation? I think most professors would want at least a month's notice. Everybody's going to be different. It depends on how busy and flexible the person is, and also how long their process is for writing letters. Because for me, I can usually do them on a pretty short notice, as long as the particular week is not crazy and overwhelming and you're not asking it for me overnight or whatever. Like usually I can do them in the same week, but I know most people are not like that. They want, 4 to 6 weeks notice, and you're going to have to keep harassing them, because once you start becoming somebody that writes letters, it's somehow like the universe knows, and they send all the students at you. And then you have a bunch of different schools sending you a bunch of different letters to fill out, and you don't even know what you're looking at anymore. So you've got to be really, really, really on top of that. And almost everything recommendation related is done electronically now. So it's all going to be like an email system where it's going to send it's going to send reminders and all kinds of stuff. And then you can go in and see when the professors opened it or worked on it or submitted it. But definitely ask them well in advance. When I was asking for letters, there was half of my programs which were due in like late November, and half of them that were due in January. So I did my applications in 2 parts. I focused on the first 5, and then I submitted the other 5 in January. And I made one of my recommendation writers very unhappy with that, because she had to go through 2 different processes of submitting my letters. She wanted all 10 of them at the same time, regardless of when they were due. So also be mindful of that. You usually want to ask them once and have a clear thing of like, this is where I need the letters for, and not tend to tack on additional requests after that initial one. So in addition to being time consuming, it is very costly to apply to grad school too, which is why I put that in your assignment. I think I spent something like $1,200 applying to 10 PhD programs the last year that I did it. Why did I apply to 10? I'll talk about that in a second. You didn't ask me that. I'm asking myself that. Why did I apply to 10? I think it's in my PowerPoint somewhere. How does a double major thing work, and do you recommend doing that? Unless you are pursuing the degree where you're going to get out at a bachelor's level, and those bachelor's degrees are actually going to mean something, I don't see a whole lot of purpose in double majoring. Minoring is usually enough to give you some sort of edge if you're looking at a program that you feel like that minor is really going to help. Like if you're going into med school and you've minored in biology, that's usually enough. You don't usually have to double major in psych and biology, because at that point, why did you even do psych? Just go do biology. Because you can do master's programs in virtually any field. It doesn't have to be. So if you've got a bachelor's degree in psychology, you can go apply to law school. You can go apply to a business master's program. You can go apply to an English master's program. You can go apply to a science master's program. It doesn't matter anymore. It's kind of like once you get the AA and you get it, like if you come from Miami-Dade and you do the AA, they just kind of write off those first 2 years and just kind of accept the fact that you're a junior now. They don't question it too much. That's kind of like what the bachelor's degree is when you're looking at further education. They're like, all right, you got through 4 years of school. You've proven some sort of academic prowess in whatever it is. Now we're going to refocus you in that master's level stuff. Sometimes even graduate programs will prefer that you not have the degree that you're trying to get at the graduate level. Like law schools love psych students, English students, philosophy students, people who are really used to reading and interpreting things a lot. more so than political science and criminal justice majors, because that's just the way it is. They like them like that. Where am I at? Okay, so this is in here. It was my next point. Look at that. So good at knowing myself. So if you're applying to grad programs, my suggestion is that you apply to 3 different kinds. I don't know if this was in your assignment or not, but I'm telling it to you now. You should apply to schools that you consider to be your givens, meaning you know for certain by looking at their requirements and looking at your qualifications that you are going to get into that program. You should have a couple of these that go on your list, and you add them in there, and they're really just a backup plan for in case everything else goes wrong. So second would be schools that you consider to be a fighting chance school. So you've looked at their like the stats of their admitting class and whatever, and you see that you're pretty competitive with them. You might be right at average for some of them. You might not have some, but you have really good at something else. You think that there's a chance that you're going to get into that school. That's where you can put the bulk of your applications if you want. And then your third thing should be your dream schools. So did I apply to the NYU PhD program? Absolutely. Was I ever going to get into the NYU PhD program? Probably not. But think about it from this perspective, right? Not because I didn't meet the minimum qualifications. I absolutely did. But because there's just so many people applying to those programs. But if everybody has the perspective of, I can't get into that school because it's Harvard, how am I going to get in there? They would never get anybody who applied. So sometimes those big name schools, those dream schools that you feel like are just a little bit out of reach, have one of those years where their applicant base is just not as strong as it usually is. So you are closer to the top of that list than you might have been at a year where a bunch of really fancy people applied, because people felt like they couldn't get in. They didn't even want to waste their time applying to that program. And sometimes you luck out and you get into a school that you think, quite honestly, is out of your league, and you end up getting to go there. But if you apply to all of those types, you're going to feel the most fulfilled. You're going to get the most bang out of your buck for applying, and you're at least going to have schools that, if all else fails, and you know that you just have to or want to start at this particular time, you can go to whatever school that is. I feel like I shouldn't say this on something that's a recording, because I'm going to wait for them to come in and bombard my house and just like kidnap me so they can't say this anymore. My seminar students can attest to the fact I say this all the time. You guys are better than programs like Nova and Carlos Albizu. I said it. I'm going there. You are better than these private institutions that will accept pretty much anyone who applies because it will result in some sort of profit for them. It is going to cost you, if you go do a doctoral level program at Nova, it is going to cost you so much money. And the value of your degree when you get out and somebody sees Nova versus an institution that has a much better reputation, you're going to leave with a huge amount of debt and not necessarily the ability to get a job that's going to match the amount of debt that you have. So sometimes it's better if you don't get into all of the schools, but you do get into Carlos Albizu. Sorry, Carlos Albizu. I do mean to pick on you. Sorry. Sometimes it's better to wait and to strengthen your application and apply again for some of those other programs, as opposed to just going, well, I guess I'm going to Carlos Albizu and pursuing a degree in clinical psychology that will cost me $500,000. Yes, I said $500,000. That is totally plausible. You will leave with at least a couple $100,000 in debt going to a private PhD program. If you go to a law school, you're looking at the same thing. Very, 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 very expensive. Did I lose you all? I can't tell. I'm not watching. Oh, no, I still have some of you. Look at that. I'm not even looking at myself. So if I'm making weird faces or ugly faces, warn me. I don't know. I'm just like staring at this PowerPoint right now. Okay. So where are we at? PhD programs only take a few people. Master's programs, law schools take much bigger cohorts. One thing I want to make sure that you know, If you take anything away from this is going to be in the top 3 things I want you to know. So you know how you can go and do your associates somewhere else and then transfer into a program and start doing a bachelor's degree? That is absolutely not the way master's programs work with PhDs. Master's programs are not just the beginning portion of a PhD where you can go get a master's degree and then do your PhD and have that master's degree count towards the PhD. If you choose to do a master's and then go into a PhD later, and I've done this, so I know this, you are going to be repeating 2 years worth of work or however long it took you to do that master's degree over again. Because say you go and you get a master's degree in mental health counseling from FIU. You do the 2-year program, you pay for the program, you do the 2 years, you get the requirements done, and then you decide you want a PhD in clinical psychology. You do not just apply to the PhD in clinical psych and have your master's carry over just like an associate's did and essentially start where the master's left off. You start over. You take the whole 2 years of coursework, again, some that you might have already taken before. You're adding on extra years. They are 2 extremely different paths that you're going down. So before you pick either one of them, you need to decide if a PhD is ever something that you want to do and weigh out whether or not you want to take those extra 2 years and tack them on by doing a master's beforehand. Sometimes it can help. I did my master's in business. I had a bachelor's in psychology, and I wanted to do a PhD in business psychology. So it made sense for me to do that. It would have made 0 sense for me to get a master's in IO Psych and then a PhD in IO Psych. There was a student in my program that did that. He got a master's degree, and then he took the same courses all over again because they do not transfer. Graduate credits almost never transfer to different universities. So even if you do your first year of a PhD in one institution and then you get into another program, you are more than likely going to have to repeat that. Typically, how long does it take to complete a master's degree? They're usually set in a 36 credit program where a typical semester is 9 credits, 3 classes, and you take usually a spring or a fall and a spring. And then for PhD programs, you do research credits in the summer. I don't know particularly what master programs do if you're off or whatnot, but then they'll have you do another 3 classes in fall and spring of the next year. So it ends up being 4 semesters, 9 credits each, and that's when you get out. Now, that's like a standard 2-year program. They have some accelerated programs that are still 36 credits. Like my master's program was a 10-month program, and it was still 36 credits. But essentially, every semester looked like summer, where there was an A term and a B term. So you took 3 or 4 classes in A, 3 or 4 classes in B, had a next semester, 3 or 4 classes in one, 3 or 4 classes in the other, and so on. And business schools will have like weekend programs or online programs or whatever programs that are shorter, but you can expect to usually put about 2 years into a master's degree unless it's got that accelerated nature to it, which psych programs are not usually accelerated master's programs. I thought a PhD was contingent on a master's. We can go straight into a PhD program. Don't you need a master's to get a PhD? You absolutely do not need a master's to get a PhD. Very, 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 very common misconception. They are not a sequential thing. You do not do a bachelor's, then a master's, then a PhD. At your bachelor's level, once you graduate, you take the GRE and you start applying to PhD programs directly. You go straight from the bachelor's into the PhD. Most of the people in my PhD program did that. They got out of their bachelor's degree and they went in. You can get a master's in between them if, say, you feel like you're not ready at the bachelor's level, but you don't want to take a year to just do research. You want to kind of get another academic thing under your belt that makes you look stronger as a candidate, which was what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to go into HO and that a business master's would make me more competitive in the IO graduate pool. And it did. I got in, and here I am. but they absolutely are not sequential like that. You do not have to have a master's to start a PhD whatsoever. You need your bachelor's degree, and it's the same thing. It's kind of like a fork in the road. You either decide if you're going to do a master's or you're going to do a PhD. Or you could do the master's and then know later at some point you're going to apply to that PhD program. But you start from the same point with both of them. They require pretty much the same exact prerequisites of you. It's just a lot harder to get into a PhD program. You need a lot more in terms of all the things that we just talked about from this, in terms of scores and grades and involvement and all that kinds of stuff. But definitely, you do not need a master's to do that. When going to graduate school, is it set up the same as picking which classes you want, or is it just a given? So I believe that most psychology programs, they are set. You are taking the same, so what is it? You're taking the same 12 classes as everybody else because you're getting a degree in something very specific. So they've narrowed down exactly what you need to take. In my business one, there was elective credits where you could specialize in particular things or get certifications. And even in one of those extremely scheduled master's programs, you can take other courses towards minors. Minors do exist at a graduate level. So you can get like a master's level, like statistics sort of specialization or whatnot. So you can try to do elective stuff, but your core coursework is set for you. It's not like undergrad where they give you a list for those 6 different categories and go, okay, pick one class from each one of these lists. No, you're taking this class and this class and this class and this class. And you will always in psych take some sort of sequence of statistics at the graduate level. You're never getting out of that. It's just going to happen. PhD is research and PsyD is more hands-on, right? I'm a little confused between the two. So a PhD, what is the difference between a PhD and a PsyD? So a PsyD is definitely more applied, meaning if you were to do a PsyD in clinical psychology, they're actually going to actively prepare you to be a clinician that works with patients. They are also going to have a research component where you're doing research, you know how to do research, but they're going to prepare you to be an applied psychologist. PhD in clinical psychology, if you go into applying to those sorts of programs and you tell them that you want to be a practicing therapist, they will not accept you. Do not do that. Even if you have to lie and say, I never plan on working with patients, that is absolutely not what they are looking for. They want people who are going to do research. It is 100% research oriented. And along the way, yes, you will gain the certification to work with patients, but it is not like people who graduate with clinical PhDs do not typically go open their own practice and work with patients. That's what masters in counseling do. That's what licensed mental health counselors do. I'm sure there's PhDs in actual counseling. That's what PsyDs do. PhDs are research oriented. You will pay a lot more money to get a PsyD because when you're doing research as a PhD student, you are bringing money into the university, especially at a place like FIU, which is the International Research University. You bring money and acclaim into the university by doing research. And in turn, they fund some portion of your program. So they're sinking money into you. But even if you get an assistantship with your PhD, you have to sign a little paper that says that you're not going to work while you do whatever it is that your assignment is. So prepare, if you are going into a PhD, to be extremely poor for like 5, 6, 7 years of your life. Because as long as you have any sort of assistantship with a PhD program, you're not going to be able to work outside of it. So they might give you, it's essentially like a 20-hour week. You might work in the, advising center at FIU. You might work at the desk in the psych office. You might be a research assistant. You might be just a general grad assistant. You might be teaching your own course at a certain point. But that's all you can do. And the stipend, the last time I looked, was about $18,000 a year, and they pay your tuition, and they pay 80% of your health insurance. So you're poor. You're poor. You're insured for the most part. You don't have to worry about paying for classes, but living, you have to take out loans. No matter what way you go, you're probably taking out loans. Who chooses the TA? Is it random? There's a graduate director who assigns out TAs and teaching assignments and whatnot based on the amount of funding they have available at the school. It's not something that you would worry about until you got into the program. And at least at FIU, I know they guarantee that for 4 years, you should have some sort of assistantship, and they prioritize earlier students as opposed to later students. So after year like 5, you're kind of on your own unless you can find a research assistantship on your own. But even if you are a master's student, you're not a PhD student, there are different departments on campus that offer assistantships that will pay your tuition, your insurance, and whatnot without being affiliated with your PhD program. Like the Center for Leadership and Service has a couple of different assistantships, which can be to any graduate student. And you go in and you do that 20 hours a week with them. There's the analytics department at FIU, which does a lot of statistics stuff. They have a couple of different assistantships. All different kinds of places on campus offer them, and you don't have to do them in tandem with your degree. You could find an assistantship that's like assisting in the chemistry department and be a psych student and still get it and still have it work towards your tuition. So there's options. It's just not very likely at the master's level that you're going to get any help financially whatsoever. Where am I at? Where am I at? Where am I at? Where am I at? Okay. So get your applications in as early as you can. I feel like that's self-explanatory. Talk to professors from the programs you're interested in. So this is a huge thing. Do I still even have anybody? Oh, I still have 11 people. It's kind of awesome. My hands are blue because, yeah, my hair is blue, so my hands are blue because this is a new thing. I'm a Smurf now. Talk to professors from the programs you're interested in. So I believe that a huge part of the reason that I got into FIU was because I went to FIU for undergrad, but one of the people who was a faculty on the committee knew who I was, and I actively spoke to her about my ambitions. So when it came down to choosing between candidates, the group on the committee are usually going to favor people that they can put a face to a name with over somebody who's just submitted an application and they've never heard from before. So if you're really interested in a particular university and you feel like you just have to go to that university, like you really want to take this from fighting chance to given sort of university, you should go look up the faculty that are involved in the particular program, look at their research interests, try to schedule a meetup on that campus if you can. They have graduate fairs usually. Go to them. Find some way to make yourself known so that once they start, they weed down to a certain amount of applications and then they look at them really, really closely. Once they do that, they see your name and they have something to associate it with. It is extremely helpful. I work with a student on getting into a UCF PhD program, and we became like the most major UCF stalkers ever. We found their student newsletter, and he contacted different students in the program because, believe it or not, graduate students are pretty influential in the process of somebody getting into the program because, number one, they know what the program consists of. They can make a fair assessment as to whether or not this person's going to be able to keep up with the program, and they're going to be the people that they work with on a day-to-day basis. So you can get favor with grad students, and it can help your application process with getting into a master's or a PhD program. So don't leave us poor little grad students out. We actually know a whole lot more than people think we do. Visit campus, I already said that. Know the kinds of research, I already said that. So if you were going into counseling and you wanted to do research in ADHD or autism, and you go look at that program and you've just decided that you have to go to whatever it is university because your mom went there and your dad went there and your sister went there and you have to go there. Your life depends on it. But you want to do that kind of research. that program might not offer that. That program might not have anybody who's even remotely interested in those sorts of things. And you're going to go apply, and in your statement of purpose, you're going to be like, hey, I really want to work with autism and children with autism and whatnot. And they go, our clinical program is directed on observing baby monkeys, and that's all we do. You've just completely wasted your first impression with that university and your time and your money. Don't do it. What else do I have here? Your question stopped. So either you're traumatized or burnt out and traumatized, or taking a pizza break, which sounds really good. I could use a pizza break right now. I already said this. Expect to take. Oh, so if you're in a PhD program, I know this sounds like counterintuitive to what I just said about the fact that they are not something where you can do a master's and then do a PhD, right? But essentially, a master's is the first 2 years of a PhD. So the kinds of coursework that you're going to do if you do decide to do a PhD is going to be pretty similar to what a master's student would do in the first 2 years. As a PhD student, you're going to do that 36 credits of coursework. Now, the campus could have completely different programs, or they could be like it was when I went to school and the master's and PhD students took the same classes together. Doesn't make much sense, right? It doesn't transfer into the other, but yet you take the same exact classes. Expect to work in groups. This is one thing that I've failed at as a graduate student because I don't work well with most groups, or they don't work well with me. We'll go from that. They don't work well with me, all right? I'm just a lovable smurf. They don't work well with me. But yeah, you're going to be doing a lot of group projects, a lot of things that involve interactions with either a small portion or the entire group of people in your class. You have to be prepared. This is not an individual thing anymore. You're going to have to interact with other people. Attendance and class participation is your life now. That's what I have written here. And it's very true. It is very, very hard to miss coursework, like miss actual physical classes at a graduate level and pass. It is a very, very, very big no-no. Passing is no longer a C or better. Passing is a B. If you do not maintain a 3.0 GPA, virtually every graduate program will dismiss you. And goodbye. You'll have like the 1 semester of academic probation to get your grades back up, and that's it. So maybe in a semester you can get a B- and still manage to have a 3.0, but they do not give grades lower. There's like A, B, and fail. Those are your options now once you reach the grad thing. Every class involves writing, and most classes involve public speaking. So you're going to have to start doing the things that you've been avoiding to this point once you get into these programs. I put an overview of PhDs, 2 to 3 years of coursework, depending on the department, 1 to 2 years of working on your thesis or thesis equivalent, depending on the school. You're going to take something called comprehensive exams, which is basically, excuse me, where anything that you've learned in your PhD program is fair game for them to ask you. They're very intimidating. And then 1 to 2 years for your dissertation. So they say, okay, yeah, you can get your PhD in 4 years. Very, 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 very unlikely. I think the average is closer to 7 or 8. And really, really, really good, quick people get done in like 5 or 6. But 4 is just not a realistic thing to expect to happen. So expect it to take a huge chunk of your life. The last slide on my thing, it says, don't panic. Don't panic. Don't panic. It's gonna be fine. It's gonna be totally fine. So now that I don't have a PowerPoint here anymore, any other specific questions that you have that have not somehow been covered in that massive chunk of ramble? Do you do a thesis in a master's program? It's not a part of most master's programs. I believe if it was, it would say when you applied that this is a master's program that has a thesis. You can do a thesis in a master's program, but it's usually not very feasible because the amount of work that it takes to prepare a thesis, you have to come up with a proposal. You have to have, at least at FIU, you have to have 3 committee members who are at the level to where they can actually be on a research level proposal. You have to then actually propose it, which the paperwork and everything involved and stuff like that can take months just to get it proposed. Then everybody has to accept it that's on your committee, and usually they have different changes they want you to make. Then you actually run the experiment and you do everything and you write this massive paper that's usually at least 100 pages long, and then you propose your thesis, and then they have to accept your thesis proposal. And it's a very, very long process. You would have to start it almost immediately when you started your master's coursework. And it would take probably more work to do the thesis than to do the actual coursework in the program. So most people go, I'm not bothering with that, because it can extend your graduation from that master's program by a year or 2. And then suddenly you have a 4-year master's degree, which not many people want. What kind of classes did I take for my master's in business? So I did a degree at UF that was called a Master's of Science in Management. And the prerequisite for this degree was that you not be a business major. So we came from all different backgrounds, and I think the most you could have had was 15 credits, or like the equivalent of a minor in business, to be in the program. So it was geared towards teaching people who didn't have a business background how to essentially be a manager in a business setting. So there was people in economics, there was people in psych, there was people in sciences, English, all kinds of different majors in the classes. And we took anything from organizational behavior to business stats to finance, accounting, economics, marketing, supply chain management, compensation structures, public speaking, business writing, a lot of different kinds of courses. And then there was electives in there, like I took sustainability and I forget what the last elective I took was. So there was some flexibility, but it was a lot of work. They have 5 semesters and they're all, I think, about 6 to 7 weeks. And we took business law, and the book was like 1,000 pages and had to have that down in 6 weeks. So it was pretty intense. But it was essentially the same kinds of coursework that they would give an MBA student to do. What was my job or assistantship when I went to graduate school? I'm still in graduate school. All right. I'm still here, Alexandra. I need to get out of this. But so I was on a particular kind of assistantship for the first 4 years because I am a McNair Fellow, which if you still have a couple of years left in your degree and you meet 2 of these 3 requirements. So one is the minority, one is, or it might just be 2 things now, a minority and requiring financial assistance. And you're in the area of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and psychology falls under science. It is a research fellowship where you go in, you propose a particular research project in conjunction with a faculty member, and then if you get into the program, you actually get to do the research, or you go do research at another university, and they prepare you for graduate school and whatnot. So they had a fellowship where for the first 4 years, the first 2 years, you didn't have to work at all. The second 2 years, you had to do some sort of assistantship, which was that 20-hour-a-week sort of thing. And I was a TA for who is now my major professor on my dissertation. I was his TA, and since I have a lot of issues with migraines and anxiety and whatnot, and I didn't want to particularly let any in-person professors down, they allowed me to be a TA for online courses. And after the first couple of years and proving myself being a TA for the online courses, the 5th year of my assistantship, I taught my own class. And you only had to teach 1 class to make the equivalent of that assistantship. But my situation is not necessarily how it was for most people. A lot of the students end up being the TA or lab instructor for the research methods course, which is why students might have a difficulty or not have really great feelings about the methods course, because you've got people who might be in their first or second year of their PhD trying to balance all of that while teaching you methods. So they might not be particularly amazing at that point in their career. But there are some people that just work in an office. They just go and they work in psych advising. It really depends on your background. I already had a master's degree, and a master's degree is required to teach college level courses. So that helped me get into the teaching thing relatively early. It's why I can be an adjunct now, even without a PhD. So even with your master's degree, you can go teach at an adjunct level at Miami-Dade. Maybe if you're lucky, somewhere like FIU or BCC or something like that. But they do prefer that anybody who's full-time have a PhD. But mine was always teaching oriented, which was what I preferred, because I am not very good at research. I said it, I'm not. Anything else? No, that somebody asked about the research assignment, but I want to make sure all this grad stuff is covered prior to that. You are welcome, and you are welcome. And anybody else who said thank you that I did not say this to is welcome. You really like this blue stuff? Like I'm feeling a little, nah. I think it might have been a mistake. Somebody asked me why I wanted to look like a Smurf. So now I've got Smurfs on the brain. Thank you, Michelle A. I don't know what your last name is. Are you showing your mom how cool I am? My mom thinks I'm pretty cool too. I must say, she does. I don't think she watches this, but she does think I'm pretty cool. Oh, amigo. I know who you are now. Oh, your son loves it too. I look like Cookie Monster. What child wouldn't love this? Like, or Grover. It's like not Elmo, the blue one. I do the Baby Shark song. All children love me. What are you talking about? All right. Well, if you think of anything, you can throw it in there. But I'm not sure if Elizabeth is still in here. Elizabeth's the one that asked me about the interview. Are you still here, Elizabeth? Elizabeth. Oh, questions. After finishing grad school, do I want to continue teaching? Absolutely. That is my goal in life, and it is pretty much the only reason at this point why I'm finishing this PhD, because I burnt out on it a long time ago. No lies there. But to teach at this level, a PhD is kind of required. So my goal is to stay in this careers area and the seminar area, and to really build up the program at FIU that prepares psych students for their futures, because it's kind of a big deal. And most of the stuff that I'm talking about, I know I seem like some magical psych guru of some sort, but it really should be stuff that is readily accessible to everybody, and not something where you guys are getting to your last semester at FIU and realizing suddenly that a grad school wants research experience, or, what sequence of class you needed to take and stuff like that. So I do plan to finish writing the textbook that I started, and hopefully stay here at FIU. I'm a third generation FIU student. My grandfather went here in one of the very first graduating classes. Then my uncle was here and did a bachelor's and a master's degree here in accounting. Then there was me. Then my mom graduated in her mid to late 50s. So there's 4 of us in my family that are very proud FIU graduates. So that's my goal. My goal is to stay here and make this university better. So we'll see. Hopefully it works out. In terms of the interview, Elizabeth, you left me. I don't know what you want to know about the interview. Does anybody have a specific question about that interview? Otherwise, I don't really know. I don't really know what you want to know. It's going to be okay. I can tell you that much. It's going to be a very flexibly graded assignment, because it's the first time that I'm ever grading one of these assignments, so I don't really have any expectations in mind when I read them. I'm just hoping that you are getting something out of the process of doing the interview, and that it's not just some sort of, tedious assignment that you're dreading. It really shouldn't be something like that. It should be much more of you actively getting the questions that you want to know the answers to answered prior to you getting out into the real world and actually, pursuing jobs like this. Some were asking about responding to the thread on Canvas. In what way? Like, there are things that need my response on Canvas? If so, I will go check that out. Last time I looked at the Canvas thread, nobody had utilized the thing for the paper. So I kind of thought, okay, nobody really wants to talk about that through Canvas because Canvas is meh. So I didn't really put a whole lot of effort into it. Where they can find people to interview. So I gave most people advice on how to do that. But if there were people that still could not find anybody to interview, I've said that you can do it more like a research assignment where you take the questions that are in the template and you try to research them on your own to figure out what the career would be like for you. So some people had very obscure, and I don't say that in a bad way, but just very unique things that they wanted to do. Like forensic psychology is not something that's very easy to get in contact with a forensic psychologist and ask them questions. But you can become a Google warrior and do research on what it would take to be a forensic psychologist. There's a lot of information out there. So if you find yourself still without somebody to ask because your career is really specific or because you're antisocial and you don't want to talk to anybody, that'd be me, I'm not gonna lie. You can definitely do it like that, where you approach it from a more research paper perspective. But either way, it's not going to be something that's harshly graded or that you need to be really stressing out about. Do I know anything about the legal psych PhD department at FIU? I did research in undergrad with a legal psych student. I know that they take about the same amount of students that the IO program does. They take like maybe 4 or 5 students a semester. It's a pretty hard to get into program. A lot of the professors do some sort of legal consulting on the side with the city of Miami or the state of Florida, and they have a relationship, I want to say, with the chemistry department in terms of like looking at evidence and stuff like that. But there's a lot of eyewitness testimony research going on. But other than that, I mean, I don't really know. It depends on the particular professors and what they're researching at that given time. But it's a pretty big department, I can tell you that much. It's got more faculty than mine does. It's got good, solid faculty in it. The IO program has been a little bit under construction lately. And they did, I believe, do away with the master's in legal psych. It's just a PhD program now. So pretty small class size. And at FIU, when you get into the PhD program and you do those first couple years of coursework, there's interdisciplinary coursework where all of the PhD students in everything in psych take some of the classes together. Like there's an equivalent of SLS for your PhD, like how to get through your PhD. That's all together. There's like history of psychology that's together, social psych that's together. There's just, you take your stats together and whatnot. So I know that you'd be with a lot of the other students on campus. Mm-hmm. Last chance. This is a long video. How did you listen to me for an hour and 23 minutes? Crazy people. Well, if you do have any other questions or you're watching this at a later time where I'm not here, You can always message me. This is the last video of this semester, but I'm the kind of person that you can always keep in contact with. My email, jhous003@fiu.edu. It has been my primary email since August of 2004 when I started at FIU. So you can always contact me through there, or try to take other classes if they're not all the way full up. Hopefully, I'm going to start teaching IO area courses starting this fall. That was what was discussed. So in addition to the memory and cognition classes, there might be other opportunities and whatnot. But definitely, you can always write to me. Resumes and grad school related stuff are kind of my thing. I don't know. Everybody has a thing that they just like learn and absorb and retain better than other things. And for some reason, none of my coursework is that thing for me. But this stuff is. I guess you do and deal with what life gives you, which is being good at grad school. I don't know. Thank you so much. Oh, you are so welcome. Congrats to all of you that are graduating. I'm going to be working graduation. You should all be in that graduation at 10 a.m. on the 10th. So I will be the only one there floating around with blue hair. So it's not going to be hard to miss me. So say hi if you're there. John, I know you're graduating. So congrats to all of you. And yeah, just shoot me messages whenever you feel like. I will be here. I hope that this class was helpful in some way. It was my first time teaching 3 sections of it next semester, and I really like it. I think it's a really important thing. It's kind of a big deal, so I'm happy to keep doing it. So yeah, shoot people my way, email me, ask me stuff. Goodbye. Have a good break. I'll miss you.